Thursday, the 22nd of March 1984, Doctor Who fans and the wider British audience had their first taste of Colin Baker as the sixth Doctor in his debut story, The Twin Dilemma. Peter Davison stepped down as the Doctor just a week earlier, wrapping up with the highly acclaimed Caves of Androzani, where Colin Baker had a brief appearance. However, The Twin Dilemma wasn't just a disappointment, it was a complete disaster. It's often remembered as one of the worst Doctor Who productions, alongside Time Lash and Dimensions in Time. A Children in Need charity crossover with EastEnders. If you've not seen it, it really is as bad as it sounds. The story left both fans and the general public alike asking the same question.
What the hell was that?
So today, I'm going to explore the people behind this story and conduct a thorough investigation to figure out who really was responsible and got this one so wrong. The casting of Colin Baker was without audition. Producer John Nathan Turner offered Baker the role on the strength of his appearance in the Peter Davison story The Arc of Infinity in 1983, where Baker portrayed Commander Maxwell. Future casting was further confirmed when Colin attended a wedding that John Nathan Turner was also at, and he captivated guests with his presence and personality. With the exception of Patrick Troughton 18 years before, Colin was asked to do something no actor in the series had been asked to do: pick up the role of the Doctor during a season of his predecessor.
Yuck!
But more of that when we examine John Nathan Turner's involvement in this case. As with any actor, Colin would have had some input into his character. It's reported that he suggested he wear a black outfit in an attempt to make the Doctor more contemporary and arguably more mysterious. This concept was rejected by John Nathan Turner on the grounds that the Master already wore a similar outfit. Colin Baker has since spoken at length about his intention for the character of Dr. Six. He's explained that the idea was to unwrap Dr. Six slowly over a period of time. He always intended to stay in the role for much longer than he did. We know that this didn't work out, but this does go some way to explaining the Doctor's very unusual behaviour in this story. The extent and timing of this behaviour was a huge gamble, something very much the responsibility of others that we will explore later rather than Baker himself. Colin Baker was energetic in his performance, delivered his lines, and did the best he could in that costume. We do see more of the intended version of Colin Baker's Doctor in subsequent stories, showing perhaps as time went on he had more power to stamp his authority on how he wanted to play the role. It's fair to say that Colin Baker, out of all the actors to play the Doctor in the classic series, was the one that considered it more than just a role. He was, and remains, a fan and friend of the series, and despite his ill treatment, remembers his time on Doctor Who fondly. Not guilty, absolute discharge. Scriptwriter Anthony Stephen was a newcomer to Doctor Who, but had worked on projects previously with producer John Nathan Turner, most notably the BBC drama All Creatures Great and Small, which also featured Peter Davison. J&T was likely his entry route into the series rather than any desire to write science fiction. Indeed, this script was unlike anything that he'd been asked to write previously, with his forte being period drama. Very little is known about the early stages of his script development, other than that there were significant delays in getting it to the script editor, Eric Sayward, and the production team in good time. Stephen claimed the pressures of working to the production team's deadline made him unwell, with his final script being delivered late. He also claimed that during writing, his typewriter exploded. I'm not sure how a typewriter can explode. If you're a typewriter expert, please drop a comment. It's reported that Stephen's script required significant rewrites by Eric Sayward before filming started. In many ways, this is the job of a script editor. However, it's unclear what the script looked like before and after Eric Sayward's rewrite. Ultimately, Stephen was hired by J&T and delivered the script, albeit late. He was an experienced writer with the Doctor Who production team more than capable of pulling the plug on his script if they felt it unsatisfactory or unsuitable. They'd done this previously with a story provisionally titled The Enemy Within by Christopher Priest, ultimately replaced by Earthshock, and the significant rewrites made on The Five Doctors when the story was taken from Robert Holmes and passed to Terence Dicks. The production team clearly decided not to pull this story.
Oh, I see.
As poor as the story turned out to be, and it was, he did what he was asked to do and write a Doctor Who script. Not guilty, but advisories. To avoid production issues, observe deadlines. Director Peter Moffat had worked on Doctor Who previously and would return for the two Doctors later in Colin Baker's tenure. He had successfully turned the complex and busy script for the Five Doctors into a more than satisfactory TV adventure, which buys him a lot of credit. This story, certainly for the director, reminds me of the saying, "You can't polish a turd." And maybe, just maybe, that applies here. Moffat himself acknowledges that he did a terrible job, but given what he had to work with, I'm not entirely sure if he, or any other director for that matter, could have salvaged much from this. Just when I was going to fully acquit Moffat of all charges, I recall the realisation of the Gicondons. As a director, he's not fully responsible for how they appeared. The costume designer's not on trial here, so Moffat will have to take the charges. I can't help but think of the Vauxhall Cars ad of the early 1970s in the UK, where the Vauxhall Griffin comes to life to convince us to buy one of his cars. Guilty, but the 5 Doctors is taken fully into account. Script editor Eric Saward received this script from Anthony Stephen late, very late. He was required to conduct some significant rewrites in addition to the standard editing that would be expected. It will always remain unclear what the script looked like before Saward's rewrite. It could have been unimaginably worse.
Oh, no, I should have thought of that.
However, as a script editor, Saward must take responsibility for the final script submitted to the director. The story is thin, the plot is on the verge of ridiculous, and the handling of the introduction of Colin Baker is a tragedy. The inclusion of another Time Lord in the story should have been a big deal. It wasn't, and if you blinked, you would have missed it until the damp squib conclusion. The introduction of a new Doctor should always be handled very carefully. Historically, all new Doctors were disliked on initial appearance. Audiences don't like change. This version of the Doctor was arrogant, unlikable, and shown to have cowardly instincts. Everything that we'd been told the Doctor wasn't since 1963. The viewing figures for this story dropped episode on episode, with 1.3 million people less tuning into episode 4 than they did for episode 1. And to make matters worse, this was the taste left in our mouths for a 9-month break before the start of the next series. The Doctor's violence towards Perry is unsettling. Not since the very first story have we seen the Doctor act so unpredictably, when only Ian prevented the Doctor from smashing the skull of a caveman with a rock. This is not badly written, it's a deliberate character assassination. To take the unpredictability to the extent it was a huge gamble, and it seriously backfired. Audiences took an immediate dislike to this incarnation of the Doctor, with the finger being unfairly pointed at Colin Baker.
Villain!
Eric Saward signed off on all of the above. He would and should have known better. Guilty. However, mitigation of lateness of script is accepted. John Nathan Turner was the producer of the series, or in modern parlance, showrunner. He had overall responsibility for the series, and to turn a phrase, the buck stopped with him. He cast Colin Baker without audition. While I like Colin Baker, and I'm intrigued by the potential he had as the Doctor, to cast such an important role on British TV without at least auditioning alternatives is curious. He rejected the costume suggestion of Colin Baker, but insisted on the multicoloured option, likely as a caricature of the then fashion of the 80s. J&T was insistent that the role of Romulus and Remus had to be played by male child actors. Director Peter Moffat made representation that the casting of twins in this remit would be near impossible from the limited pool of actors. Moffat suggested either using adults or opening the role to girl twins or fraternal twins to increase the pool. J&T was not swayed, and Paul and Andrew Conrad were cast late on. While I certainly don't intend to hate on these child actors, their acting ability was really poor, and it really stands out as such. This could have been easily avoided should J&T have relented in his remit. While the casting of more accomplished actors would not have saved this story, this area would have not been such an easy target for criticism. Changing the dynamic of the sex and or age of the twins would not have had any negative impact on the plot, and J&T would have understood this. His decision is perplexing. J&T took 2 further gambles, introducing a new Doctor with a complete story at the business end of a season, and then holding him over for 9 months until the next season. I would guess the intention was to create some mystery in the traditional media as to how this new Doctor would be, that would slowly brew over these months and generate some much needed interest in the programme. J&T was redeemed to an extent as the viewing figures for the debut story of the Colin Baker season proper, Attack of the Cybermen, was really very good. But this left fans and the general public wondering what was going on at the conclusion of the broadcast of Twin Dilemma, given we'd seen a Doctor that was just undigestible to audiences. In his defence, J&T does introduce a surprise witness, an actor by the name of Peter Davison, who made these comments in 1983. After I first appeared as a Doctor in Logopolis, it was ages before I actually appeared in my own stories. I said to John Nathan Turner at the start that when I did leave, I would much prefer to go so that someone else had to take over. So really that thing of being the current Doctor had to be lifted from me before the end of the season. So from everyone's point of view, it was really much better off if one Doctor disappeared and the new Doctor appears and does at least one story in the same season. J&T was an experienced producer. He understood the programme and the expectation of fans and general audiences very well. He took an extraordinary risk including the Colin Baker story at the conclusion of the season, featuring a Doctor that was scripted to be simply unlikable, and then leaving us with that for most of the year. He could have known better, he should have known better. The Colin Baker era would have been much better served going from the caves of Androzani directly to Attack of the Cybermen. The Twin Dilemma was a gamble that backfired. Its legacy still marking the programme to this day. It damaged the reputation of the series, and this damage undoubtedly played a part in the later decision to put the series on hold for 18 months. And J&T was wholly responsible for this. While he would produce some much stronger stories into the Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy era, this was a watershed moment for the decline of the programme. Guilty. Thanks for watching, and I really do appreciate you staying this long. If you did enjoy this, go and check out my channel for lots more Doctor Who related nonsense. And if you really liked it, give me a like and a subscribe. It really does motivate me to do more.